Hey everybody, in this video we're going to take a look at Stephen King's 1993 novel, Dolores Claiborne, or as the narrator in the audiobook says it, Dolores Claiborne. So in this video we're going to take a look at Dolores Claiborne. I'll show you what to look for when trying to identify a first US and first UK edition of the book, and we'll talk a little bit about some historical context and thoughts on the novel itself. The first US edition was released by Viking. The back author photo. Inside the jacket, look for a price of $23.50 US, Canada $28.99. The jacket will also have an export price on the bottom. I believe that is a universal fact. £14.99, export only. I have seen several of these and they all had that. Maybe possible that yours does not. As long as it has the US price, I think you're good to go. There's kind of yellowy, orangey end papers. Just lovely title page artwork. I'm a big fan. And on the copyright page, it's very handy dandy. There's a number line, and the number line should include the number 1. And that's how you know you have a first trade edition, first printing. Underneath the jacket, I have nice dark gray boards, SK's initials in red, black cloth binding on the spine, and embossed or foil stamped lettering and graphics on the spine of the book. The first UK edition was released by Hodder and Stoughton, and compared to the US, it has a very different look, different feel to the cover image, which I find very interesting. White spine, back cover. So for years I was familiar with this author photo. In the Hodder and Stoughton edition, it is not as cropped, and I can see the head of a cat in Stephen King's arms. Until I got this book recently, I was not aware. I had never seen a version of this picture with a cat's head visible in Stephen King's arms. So he's like hanging out and he's cuddling his cat in this picture. And if that doesn't scream King of Horror, I don't know what does. But anyway, inside the jacket, look for a price on the flap of £14.99 net in UK. And on the copyright page, look for the language first published in Great Britain, 1993. Underneath the jacket, pretty typical for UK editions, it is a single color all around, kind of a, feels like treated paper, could be treated cloth, boards, stark gray, black, all the way around, with gold lettering on the spine. So it's neither here nor there, really, but I remember when Dolores Claiborne was released. I remember seeing this in the US, and one of the first things that stood out to me was that the book is narrow. It's narrower than most. It still has the same uniform height, 9.5 inches, but it is not as wide, which, I don't know, my OCD kicks in. Even as a kid, I was like, it's not as wide. It needs to be as wide. And in comparison to the UK edition, you can see there's not much, 1/2 inch or so. It's 1/2 inch more narrow. But it is kind of a unique thing. You know how most flags are rectangular, but then every once in a while you see a flag that's a square, or a flag that is some odd shape, and you just go, wait, that's the wrong shape. It's not supposed to look like that. That's how I felt when I saw the first US edition of Dolores Claiborne. And also, interesting stylistic decision, it has deckled edges, which is fairly uncommon in Stephen King trade editions. It just gives it a unique feel, and the UK edition does not. You know, neither one of these books really is like a barn burner when it comes to iconic imagery on the cover. I like the UK just because it's so novel, pun totally intended, and different than what I'm used to and what I've seen my whole life. But really, when it comes down to it, with the foil printing on the cover and this interesting image of Dolores looking down into the well, a very powerful scene and important to the novel, I think I give the edge to the U.S. Trade edition. But here are the two side by side, and yeah, first US and first UK hardcover trade editions. In 1992, Hodder and Stoughton released a special Christmas gift edition of Dolores Claiborne, which is technically, I guess, a limited edition, but it kind of slides under the radar. It doesn't get talked about a whole lot, but it does exist. It is out there. It was limited to 2,000 copies, slip-cased with a facsimile Stephen King signature, which is the same thing that PS Publishing does on their numbered editions. They include a facsimile signature on a lot of them. It is not profusely illustrated as far as I know. I've never seen it. It is fairly plain looking, so like I said, it does kind of slip under the radar, but it is out there. There's a UK limited edition from Hodder and Stoughton listed as the Christmas gift edition. Worth checking out if you're interested in the title, or if you're trying to build your limited edition collection. It could be a fairly inexpensive one to track down and add. So Dolores Claiborne originally started life as one half of a longer book comprised of two novellas that was originally going to be called In the Path of the Eclipse. And one half of that book was Dolores Claiborne, and the other half was Gerald's Game. And the two books are interconnected, they're interrelated. They both have action that takes place around a solar eclipse. Now that I've read both books, it is interesting how the two main characters they share some sort of psychic connection in relation to the eclipse. They are aware of each other, but I think it would be because the Stephen King universe includes so many interconnected details. A character from one will be name dropped in another, or events of one will be referenced in another, and so you get the sense that it's all directly interconnected. But it's not common that there are two books where characters have a psychic link across the books. I think that aspect would have made more sense if these two things had ended up in the same book together. But as it stands, I mean, it doesn't hurt them. It doesn't hurt the titles that aspect is in there, but it is not really needed. I think there would be enough of a connection to link these two in the Stephen King universe if they simply had action that took place around the same event, the solar eclipse. To have the characters actually have a psychic link and connection to each other is kind of strange. And when I experienced Dolores Claiborne just in the last couple of years, I did the audiobook version, and the narrator of the audiobook is wonderful. She did a wonderful and amazing job, and you get caught up in the story, and it kind of pulls you out of the story so you're just in this lady's head, like literally you're in her head, and then everything kind of stops so she can talk about the connection to the girl from Gerald's Game, and you know, it doesn't ruin the novel, not by a long shot, but it did kind of break up the flow a little bit. But anyway, after So Needful Things was the last Castle Rock novel, and I think the early 90s is a really interesting time for Stephen King stylistically. He was challenging himself, and he was growing, and he was doing different things. And Gerald's Game and Dolores Claiborne, like back-to-back novels that both feature strong female protagonists. In the case of Dolores Claiborne, two very strong female characters. And it was just, it's an interesting change of pace, and I like that it feels like Stephen King is challenging himself. Dolores Claiborne not only is a novel that features a strong female main character, the entire thing is it's a monologue. The entire thing is dialogue. It's amazing. She's being interviewed, I think, in a police station, and she's giving a statement. And over the course of several hours, seemingly, she just rattles off this whole story. And that, I don't know, it's such a stylistic diversion, and it's such an experiment, and it could have just fallen flat. But instead, it could be the performance by the narrator, the words by Stephen King, but Dolores just becomes one of the most intriguing, most well-rounded, most interesting of Stephen King's characters. She's earthy, and she's simple, but she's not dumb. She's wise, and she's savvy, and she's canny. And the relationship that builds up between her and Vera, her employer, is really interesting and kind of touching and heartfelt over the course of the novel. But the entire thing is dialogue, and it really does suck you in. There's another aspect to it, and I've read other reviews of Dolores Claiborne, and this part is specifically called out. A couple of the characters that show up in Insomnia, which was, I'm sure, Stephen King had in the works around the same time because it was released around the same time. Two of the characters, Clotho and Lachesis, are mentioned in Dolores Claiborne, and that's another kind of like when she stops to talk about the link she feels with the little girl in Gerald's Game, when she's talking and nice and Maine dialect, and then all of a sudden she's talking about Clotho and Lachesis, and it's like, whoa, what? It is kind of jarring. And so there's a couple of missteps like that break the flow of the novel, but truly, Dolores, along with Gerald's Game, are, in my opinion, two of the most underrated books in the Stephen King catalog. Dolores, I don't know which I would say is more underrated, but he's got so many books, and I think that early 90s period often gets overlooked, even though it was a very fertile period, and he was doing some really interesting things. But I think that Gerald's Game and Dolores Claiborne together are a really interesting entry point into the Stephen King universe. Dolores Claiborne in particular, because it has plenty of elements recognizable as Stephen King, but it's different enough. I remember, for what it's worth, I remember my grandma really enjoying Dolores Claiborne. She was already a big Stephen King fan, but I remember her talking to my mom about the book and how much she enjoyed it and how unique it was. And all these years later, I have to agree with her. But the two together kind of share a similar design scheme, similar font and jacket artwork style. It would be really cool. I think that each of these were fleshed out when they were released as standalone novels. It would be really cool someday to still get In the Path of the Eclipse and get the 2 standalone novellas in a single book, or even 2 slim volumes in one slipcase or something. Stephen King releases books so frequently. I mean, nowadays he's at 1 book a year, and so each book has its chance to stand alone and make its mark, and then it just kind of gets gobbled up in the excitement and the hype for the next book. And there's, along the way, there's plenty of examples, and I'll do that in another video, of underrated Stephen King novels that they come out and they have their moment, and then they just can't kind of get gobbled up into the momentum and just the never-ending cycle of new Stephen King releases. Thankfully, blessedly, over 50 years, you know, there's 77 books, 77 major works, and there's a lot of stuff that really stands out, and there's a lot of stuff that gets kind of pushed into the shadows, rightfully or wrongfully. But anyway, Dolores Claiborne, definitely not an uncommon book. It is pretty easy to find, had a massive first print run. It is getting on to be 30 years old, so it can be hard to find it in good shape, but it's not a particularly long book, so it's not heavy. The process of reading it doesn't necessarily break the components of the book down because it's not so heavy. And, you know, for whatever reason, I found when I find copies of this, they are generally in decent shape, because maybe it wasn't a big seller, maybe people who bought it didn't read it. Whatever reason, it is easy to find one of these. And like most common books from the 90s to today, you know, $25 or less. If you can find a copy in really nice shape and you can pay $25 or less, then I think that's a solid deal. This one I found at my local bookstore, you know, $8.99, something like that, and it's in really nice shape, like potentially, who knows, read carefully or just unread. And so it wasn't like the most exciting day in my collecting journey when I found this really nice first edition of Dolores Claiborne, but you know, hey, there you go. It's another one for the collection, and it's well worth checking out, well worth picking up. And you know, for the right adventurous type of reader, it could be a great entry point into the entire Stephen King universe. But anyway, thank you very much for your time, and I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will talk to you later. Bye.